Now, joining me now is Samuel Ramani, an Associate Fellow at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. Professor, great to have you there. So first of all, do the US and Israel have the mandate to attack Iran?
Well, I think that the U.S. and Israel are basically using this to build leverage for any kind of future diplomatic negotiations. So it's interesting to see that Arakchi is keeping the door open, the Iranian foreign minister, to a resumption of dialogue on the nuclear question this coming week. I don't think that the negotiations are necessarily dead or have stopped. And also, I think that if Iran does not compromise not only on its nuclear facilities, but also on its ballistic missile capabilities and regional activities, which the Iranians are very resistant to do, the U.S. and Israel are trying to show the Iranians that they can carry out severe damage to their leadership and potentially decapitate the regime entirely. So that's what I think the U.S. is trying to do here, build leverage and threaten something bigger if needed.
Well, this happens only days after the latest round of nuclear negotiations in Geneva. We were talking about it just now. And what key strategic missteps or red lines were crossed that made this escalation almost inevitable?
Well, I think that basically this escalation was widely speculated. So I was in the UAE actually last week, and there was a widespread belief and assumption amongst Emirati diplomats and business leaders alike that the U.S. was going to do some kind of a limited military strike to build leverage ahead of these talks. While the Omanis were being able to convene the Iranians and the Americans together and pass messages between them, the core issues relating to uranium enrichment, ballistic missiles, and regional actions were not getting resolved. So this was kind of what was going to inevitably be the trend. And yes, I do think that the U.S. is paying very close attention to what's happening in Fordow, also what the Russians have managed to reconstruct in Bushehr, as well as Isfahan, as the correspondent noted earlier. And these concerns about uranium enrichment have now triggered a military attack.
Well, compared with the 12-day war last year, this time it is not only about limiting Iran's capability of making nuclear weapons, as Trump urged Iranians to take over the Iranian government. So what do you think is the end game of the U.S. this time?
Well, I don't think that the end game is actually clearly defined and clearly spelt out. I mean, obviously, there's a substantial amount of support for regime change in Iran within Trump's inner circle. We saw Lindsey Graham, for example, the South Carolina senator, visit the UAE and Saudi Arabia a little over a week ago, trying to drum up support amongst regional partners for that. The Saudis and the Emiratis were very skeptical, and they pushed back. Benjamin Netanyahu has been and Israel have been pushing for regime change, and there was a collective frustration among some of Trump's core supporters that he did not enforce his red line during the Iranian protests. When he threatened military action and protesters were killed, the mass executions didn't happen, maybe, but there were definitely many thousands of protesters who died, and then the U.S. didn't follow through. And people were comparing that to Obama's backtrack on Syria. So he's having to deal with that pressure, and that's also, I think, encouraging him to pursue something more expansive this time around than something that's just purely related to nuclear sites.
I think many people are wondering, how do domestic U.S. political dynamics factor into the decision-making this time?
Well, I think it's a massive factor over here, and it's important to keep in mind that there's basically two schools of thought relating to the Iranian issue within Trump's inner circle. So on the one hand, you've got a more hawkish wing, like just as I mentioned, represented by people like Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz from Texas, who would want to see the U.S. go all in on kind of a military campaign. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, is rumored to be in that camp. And then there's another camp that's a lot more cautious and a lot more circumspect. So close confidence and advisors to the president like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been known to be much more reluctant to support a military attack. And also we've seen wings of the MAGA movement basically condemn or criticize the strength of the U.S. alliance with Israel, even using the Israel First mantra as a mockery of America First in some of their rhetoric, and don't want this war at all. And the Gulf countries have been lobbying and building on that to kind of deter a war. So Trump has been dancing between these two factions within his coalition, and that divide has prevented him from making a decision. And now it seems as if, at least for now, he's firmly aligned with the more pro-war camp. And he believes that his political fortunes will be strengthened by aligning with them. And that's a calculation that led to the attack today.
And what are the likely consequences of a prolonged military confrontation? Because some of our experts have saying this could be prolonged, and then we're looking at the broader repercussion in the Middle East, and also we're looking at the security issue, the oil markets, and other groups like Houthis and Hezbollah. So we're looking at a lot of elements involved this time.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we saw the interrelationship, and we saw the level of integration between various theaters of escalation after October 7th, right? We saw the rapid spillover to Lebanon, to Yemen, to even periodically causing discord inside Iraq, to very, very complicated relationships between the GCC countries and Israel. The Abraham Accords were effectively stopped. And the same kind of integration of theaters will occur and transpire this time around. I mean, I think it's very likely that if Iran, for example, were to take the step to disrupt oil transit in the Strait of Hormuz, the Houthis would force multiply against that along the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, effectively choking the Saudis off. I think it's no coincidence that Jebel Ali was in the firing line this time around. That's not just because it's near American military presences, but it's also a vital port that the UAE would need as a hedge against Hormuz. So it's very clear already, even in these early hours, that there are integrations of various different theaters. There's a Gulf theater, an Israel-Iran theater, and potentially Lebanon and Yemen and others getting dragged in. So I think that there is that big risk of a regional war escalating. I don't think that the U.S. is easily going to be able to achieve regime change in Iran, because even if you assassinate some of the key members of the clerical establishment or the IRGC, those institutions have the ability to renew themselves and bring out new figures and new leaders, just like we've seen after Soleimani was assassinated or after the wave of attacks in 2024 and 2025. And the only way to do that would be a ground invasion or an amphibious landing, which would be anathema to anybody in Trump's inner circle because of the casualties, the cost, and the risk of an Iraq or even worse scenario unfolding. So I think that it'll fall short of regime change, but a regional war is definitely possible.
Thank you very much for your insights. That is Samuel Ramani, an Associate Fellow from the University of Oxford.